Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidos todos. Thank you for joining us for our 2022 Reproductive Justice Impact webinar. We will be sharing the results from our 2021 Reproductive Justice Impact Evaluation, followed by a panel discussion with some of our grantee partners. Gracias por acompañarnos a nuestro seminario en línea sobre el impacto de la justicia reproductiva del 2022. Compartiremos los resultados de nuestra evaluación del impacto de la justicia reproductiva del 2021, seguido de un panel de discusión con algunos de nuestros socios beneficiarios. My name is Evelyn Quintana, and I use they, them, ella pronouns. I am Groundswell's Grantmaking Program Associate, and I'm calling in today from ancestral Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho lands. Mi nombre es Evelyn Quintana y uso los pronombres ella y soy asociada del programa de Grantmaking de Groundswell. Llamo hoy desde las tierras ancestrales de los Ute, Cheyenne, y Arapaho. I'm going to be kicking us off with the land acknowledgement. Voy a empezar con un reconocimiento de tierras. We acknowledge those who stood, lived, worked, fought, died, and loved on these lands now called the continent of North America. We acknowledge that these lands existed prior to occupation and that the land on which we now reside is stolen land. That land, this land, and most land has been commodified so it could be violently taken from by colonizers from sovereign indigenous communities. Reconocemos a aquellos que estuvieron de pie, vivieron, trabajaron, lucharon, murieron y amaron estas tierras que ahora se llaman el continente de América del Norte. Reconocemos que estas tierras existían antes de la ocupación y que las tierras en que ahora residimos son tierras robadas. Esta tierra y la mayor parte de la tierra ha sido comercializada para que violentamente los colonizadores pudieran robarla de las comunidades indígenas soberanas. We acknowledge the Munsee Lenape, Canarsie, and Mohican peoples, the Kickapoo peoples, the Muskogee peoples, and the Muskogee peoples, on whose land the speakers of today's event reside. We take a moment to acknowledge the Ohlone people on whose land Zoom headquarters reside. Within our virtual space, we must acknowledge all Indigenous peoples across the globe. May we honor you and yours. Ashe. Reconocemos a los pueblos Munsee Lenape, Canarsie y Mohican, los pueblos Kickapoo, los pueblos Muskogee y los pueblos Muskogee, en cual tierra residen los oradores del evento de hoy. Nos tomamos un momento para reconocer a la gente del Ohlone, en cual tierra reside la sede de Zoom. Dentro de nuestro espacio virtual, debemos reconocer a todos los pueblos indígenas de todo el mundo, que te honoremos a ti y a los tuyos. Ashe, así sea. We acknowledge the beauty and the brutal realities of those souls of African descent who arrived from that continent, those that worked under the realities of the brutal chattel slavery system to build this nation. We acknowledge their contributions to the economic realities of this country through their labor as domestic servants, laborers, and farmers, the very same people who led many uprisings. Reconocemos la belleza y las realidades brutales de aquellas almas afrodescendientes que llegaron de ese continente, aquellos que trabajaron bajo las realidades del brutal sistema de esclavitud chattel, quienes construyeron esta nación. Reconocemos sus contribuciones a las realidades económicas de este país a través de su trabajo como empleados domésticos, jornaleros y agricultores, las mismas personas que lidiaron muchos levantamientos. Now let us say this, while land acknowledgements have become common practice, it is not the work. Acknowledging the death does not equal reparations. This be a call to action to examine one's own role in the fabric of colonization, to commit oneself to being in right relationship with the land and indigenous people of it, to ask oneself what your commitment is to giving the land back, to ensuring elderhood for these communities, to honor indigenous ancestors whose land was stolen and who was forced to work this land by colonizers, to telling the truth about the foundation of the United States, and to commit to working to dismantle white supremacy and other oppressive forces that continue to harm the planet, our indigenous siblings, and us. Ashe. Ahora, digamos esto. Si bien los reconocimientos de tierra se han convertido en una práctica común, no es el trabajo. Reconocer la muerte no equivale a reparar. Este puede ser un llamado a la acción para examinar nuestra propia participación en el tejido de la colonización, comprometernos a estar en una relación correcta con la tierra y los pueblos indígenas a la misma. Es tiempo de preguntarnos, ¿cuál es nuestro compromiso para devolver la tierra, de proteger la viejez de estas comunidades, para honrar a los ancestros indígenas a quienes los colonizadores les robaron la tierra y obligaron a los ancestros indígenas a trabajar, a decir la verdad sobre la fundación de los Estados Unidos y comprometernos a trabajar para desmantelar la supremacía blanca y otras fuerzas opresivas a que continúan dañando a nuestro planeta, nuestros hermanos indígenas y a nosotros. Ashe, así sea. Before I hand off the mic, I wanted to go over some housekeeping details. Our amazing tech team is working diligently to provide digital security. If you notice something that feels off, please DM the host who will connect with our digital security team. And we are offering Spanish interpretation for today's event. Our partners from Sensotle will be doing a language justice opening for interpretation shortly. Antes de pasar el micrófono, quería compartir algunos detalles. Estamos ofreciendo interpretación en español para el evento de hoy. Nuestros socios de Sensotle estarán abriendo una apertura de justicia lingüística para interpretación en breve. Nuestro increíble equipo de tecnología estará trabajando digitalmente para brindar seguridad digital. Si usted nota que algo se siente mal, envíe un mensaje al host, quien se conectará con nuestro equipo de seguridad digital.
Thank you, Sensotle and Evelyn, for your thoughtful opening, for grounding us in language justice and land acknowledgement. My name is Sheena Hampton Johnson, pronounced she, her, they, them, and I am based outside of Orlando, Florida, on Seminole and Tucumã land, and I'm currently interim co-ED here at Groundswell Fund with Meenakshi Menon. Prior to this role, I was the senior director of grant making here, and I am so honored to co-lead Groundswell during this important movement moment. Over the last 17 years, I have dedicated my life to movement building as an organizer, artist, activist, and practitioner in philanthropy. I am deeply dedicated to investing in grassroots leadership and deeply believe that those of us most impacted by oppression and living at the intersection of multiple oppressions have the clearest insight to lead our way to freedom. I'm grateful to lead this work at Groundswell Fund.
Thank you, Sheena. Hi, everyone. So grateful to be in community with you today. I'm Meenakshi Menon. Alongside Sheena, I'm one of Groundswell's interim co-executive directors. I'm calling in today from Muncie, Lenape, and Canarsie land, now called Brooklyn, New York. For the past 2 years, I've led our donor and funder organizing work, but I come to this work as a former organizer and field researcher, deeply rooted in US movements and global movements, in racial and gender justice, in grassroots power building, and in wealth redistribution. In this moment, my priority, alongside the incredible leaderful team at Groundswell, is to uplift and abundantly resource our grantees who know the best path to freedom for all people. Today, we are gathering, as you all know, to uplift the impact of the incredible reproductive justice movement from 2021, while in 2022 awaiting the final Dobbs SCOTUS decision that will likely overturn Roe. For our communities who have been raising the alarm and organizing on behalf of reproductive justice for decades, Roe has always been a floor rather than a ceiling. In this moment, as we continue to fight for abortion access and full spectrum reproductive and gender affirming care, it's essential that we remember that our struggles are linked. The fight for abortion access is inextricably linked to the fight to protect trans youth and trans liberation, which is inextricably linked to the fight for voting rights. While there is so much that each of us is holding in this moment, our movements know the best path to freedom. Movement organizations like the AFIA Center, Color, Take, and Miami Worker Center, who you all will hear from today, have the vision, decades-long track record, and relationships with communities on the ground already. Our job as philanthropy in this moment is to abundantly resource movements so that we can win. Passing to you, Sheena.
Thank you, Meenakshi. Yes, so we can win, so our folks can win on the ground. And so Groundswell has been doing this work for nearly 20 years funding the front line of the RJ movement. And what we've learned is that the key to movement building is resourcing long-term intersectional organizing infrastructure that is local and state-based. We have done this by moving flexible general operating support dollars quickly to grassroots movements led by women of color, trans, and gender expansive people of color, centering Black, Indigenous, and gender expansive led work. In this moment, this means moving unapologetically money to abortion funds and to support abortion access. It also means supporting community-rooted models of care that provide full spectrum reproductive health care. This includes access to abortion, gender-affirming care, as well as perinatal and birth and postpartum care. Philanthropy must de-silo funding approaches and support more intersectional full spectrum reproductive health care and organizing. Because that's how our grantees are working on the ground. They're working in an intersectional way. They're not de-siloing and working this over here and that over here. They're working together to meet the needs on the ground. I want to also share that Groundswell has intentionally focused on prioritizing certain regions, the South, the Southwest, the Midwest. It is key right now not to abandon our folks fighting in the most difficult political climates. We must double down on robustly resourcing local and state-based work in underfunded regions. Over the last 2 years, we have seen a devastating, rapid increase in the criminalization of bodily autonomy. It is a direct backlash to the power that we are building, and we must understand that, right? And as major players in philanthropy, it is important to see the fight to protect bodily autonomy is directly connected to the fight to stop the criminalization of Black and brown bodies. As funders and donors, we must interrogate the ways our funding models reinforce support of the state and unjust laws. Our systems are rooted in white supremacy, and they have never been designed to protect our people and our communities. The time is now. You'll hear that phrase, the time is now, because it is now, right? We must fight for an abolitionist future. Concretely, this means investing in grassroots legal support and infrastructure for folks who are fighting back against this criminalization and who are providing care despite the criminalization they face. This is also a deep opportunity for movement. It's exciting for us to be like, we can be thinking more imaginatively and expansively about a new world we can build. A world where everyone has access to quality, affordable, culturally congruent, and gender-affirming full spectrum reproductive health care. Yes, that is a mouthful, but that is what's needed. And we have an opportunity right now to build a movement that brings us all along and doesn't de-silo what our needs are around our reproductive health care and our gender-affirming care. So, in this moment, as funders and donors, what can we do to better flank movement, organizations, and leaders in this post-Roe moment? Well, at Groundswell, we want to invite you with us alongside Funders for Reproductive Equity, Miss Foundation for Women, Funders for Justice, and the Women's Funding Network to sign our bold pledge that we've developed and released a few weeks ago. And in this pledge, we outlined 5 immediate actions that philanthropy can take to protect abortion access and bodily autonomy. The first one, give now and give with trust. Folks know what to do, they're doing it. They just need to be resourced at scale. 2, listen to movement leadership. Again, don't need to say it again, but I'm gonna say it again. Folks know what to do, listen to them, right? This one is key. The third one is plan for the future while acknowledging the past. There are a lot of folks who are new, right? Who are like, we need to show up, oh my God. And you are welcome. Yes, please show up. And there's folks who've been in this fight for decades. So there's an opportunity to acknowledge, be humble about the past and why maybe you have not been in this fight, and also to follow those who know the way, who've been funding in this space. So that's a key piece for us. 4th is collaborate across funding strategies and issues. Meenakshi said it beautifully. For us right now, we have to understand that voting rights is not separate from the fight for access to abortion, not separate from the fight to protect trans young people, that these struggles are bound together. And we have to work multi-issue intersectionally to create freedom for all of us. so that no one's left behind. And then fifth, invest in existing movement infrastructure for the long term. You've heard us say this over and over again, infrastructure, but not just infrastructure, but infrastructure that's centering folks of color, BIPOC folks, right? And it's not just for the election cycle to this election cycle, it's for the long term, right? So I want to encourage our peer funders and donors here today to show up in this moment, not only by signing the pledge, which we want you to do. We already have 150 folks who have signed, which is wonderful, but also making bold and very transparent and clear funding commitments to support abortion access and full spectrum reproductive health care that leaves no one behind. The time is now, I'm gonna say it again, to fund the RJ movement at scale. We can no longer be okay with the bust and boom funding that typifies the RJ movement. As poet June Jordan said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And I'll pass it to Meenakshi.
I'm going to close us out and keep us moving. I'll just say, by signing this pledge, it's not just about signing your name to a document. It's really about making a larger commitment to build a strategy to fund our movements at scale. And if you're interested in doing this hard work of donor and funder organizing, join us and get in touch with us directly. We're really grateful to all of our supporters for all of the dollars that have already been moved. But today, it's not just about that. We're asking you to join us in doing the hard work of unlocking millions more so that our movements are fully funded. As Sheena has said numerous times, the time is now. Fund all of us like you want us to win. Thank you so much. And I will now pass over to my colleague, Na Amissa Hammond, who will share our powerful 2021 RJimpact evaluation findings.
Thank you, Sheena and Meenakshi. Hello, everyone. My name is Na Amissa Hammond, and I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Director of Grantmaking at Groundswell. And I'm pleased today to share the findings from Groundswell's evaluation of the power and the strategy of the reproductive justice movement. Next slide, please. So as you have heard, over the last few years, it has been devastating for the RJ movement, with tremendous backlash against voting rights and bodily autonomy issues like abortion and gender-affirming care. But history teaches us that whenever social justice movements make progress, there is an equal and opposite level of backlash. As we have seen people of color-led movements, from the RJ movement to Black Lives Matter to Standing Rock, gain power and prominence in this political climate of rising authoritarianism and white supremacy, we can expect to see swift and fierce retaliation, often at the expense of communities who are the most marginalized. In 2022 alone, we have seen 541 abortion restrictions introduced across 42 states. More than 300 anti-LGBTQ bills have been introduced this year, with more than 130 of them specifically targeting trans people. And as of March of this year, legislators have introduced 361 voting restriction bills across 47 states, which is a higher volume than the same period of last year. As we have said, these issues are interconnected. Abortion, trans rights, and racial justice issues like voting are used as wedge issues and weaponized by the opposition against the growing power of Black and Brown communities. Next slide. So it is in this context that Groundswell partnered with Informing Change, which is an equity-focused strategic learning group, to lead an evaluation of the reproductive justice movement. They surveyed 80 organizations who were Groundswell grantees or sub-grantees, the majority of whom are led by women of color or trans people of color. And this was also the first time that Groundswell's birth justice grantees participated, as we are acknowledging the growing organizing power of the birth justice movement. We want to thank each of the organizations who took the time to share their stories with us. Many of you are on the call today. It is an honor to support you and to amplify your brilliant work. In 2021, these 80 organizations had efforts on the ground in 49 states, all except for West Virginia, in Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, with most of Groundswell's investments going to our priority regions of the South, Southwest, and Midwest, which you will see in dark blue on this map. Our grantees worked at the local, state, regional, federal, and international levels with the majority of their organizing happening at the state and local levels, where we know that progressive change is most possible in this political climate. Organizations also worked with over 50 tribal nations, and for the first time, the online space was a top location for organizing, with 91% of RJ groups leading digital organizing efforts. Next slide, please. What's clear is that the RJ movement is growing in strength and size despite the limitations of the pandemic. Last year, RJ grantees mobilized over 800,000 people through grassroots organizing campaigns and advocacy efforts, which was a 40% increase over 2019 when they mobilized 500,000 people, and a 150% increase over 2018 when they mobilized 300,000 people. In addition, RJ Group spurred 53,000 of their members from directly impacted communities to take on increased leadership roles, such as planning campaigns and facilitating trainings, recruiting new members, or running for office. While we know that change at the federal level may be hard to achieve, at the local and the state levels, RJ groups are building infrastructure and winning concrete changes. And this is all because of the people power and the voting power that they have been building across cities and towns and rural areas and at the state level for years. Next slide, please. Most of our grantee partners also focus on the full spectrum of reproductive issues, which will be critical in the years ahead. While for years, funding for reproductive rights has focused on abortion, reproductive justice organizations have focused on the full spectrum of care, from abortion to contraception to birth and beyond. In 2021, 63% of RJ groups mobilized to protect and secure abortion access, almost 70% organized for contraception justice, and 77% worked directly to secure access to other reproductive healthcare services, like high-quality perinatal healthcare, breast cancer screening, menstrual equity, and sexual health. Next slide. In addition, our grantees named that centering intersectionality throughout their work led to really powerful alliances and movement building. RJ organizations focused on a vast array of issues last year, including civic engagement, economic justice and workers' rights, healing justice, and LGBTQ rights. And notably, racial justice was the most mobilizing force among RJ organizations' bases in 2021, with more than half of RJ groups working directly or in solidarity on key racial justice issues. As Black lesbian poet and activist Audre Lorde said, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And RJ organizations are embracing this principle wholeheartedly. Next slide. Throughout last year, we also saw birth justice and RJ organizations work to meet the immediate needs of communities facing the crises of COVID and systemic racism and economic injustice. At the same time, they led campaigns to organize for systemic change. Impressively, RJ grantees provided direct services and mutual aid to almost 500,000 people across the US last year. And this included things like food, clothing, household necessities, housing assistance, healthcare, and therapy and counseling, because we know so many communities are dealing with grief and loss during the pandemic. RJ organizations know that unless their leaders and their communities are taken care of, they can't remain leaders in the movement. And while funders have been hesitant to fund direct services, RJ groups know that taking care of our people is strategic, and it is important for effective base building and organizing within impacted communities. Next slide. So when we looked specifically at the changes in laws and policies, organizations that reported on doing policy work collectively engaged in advocacy on 379 policies last year. This included 193 wins, which we define as pro-reproductive justice policies that passed or harmful policies that were blocked. This also included 58 losses. So efforts to pass progressive legislation that failed, or efforts to block harmful legislation that failed, and 128 cases where the piece of legislation was still pending in March when the evaluation was complete. It's really important to name that policy change doesn't happen magically. It's a direct result of people power, and it is multi-phased. It requires the work of multiple coalitions and organizations and often will unfold over many years. And in fact, many of the wins were achieved after over a decade or more of organizing and voter engagement by our RJ grantees. Next slide. So today you are going to hear from RJ leaders who are winning progressive policies and laws, progressive changes in laws and policies, and helping to advance reproductive justice. Groundswell's grantees across the country were central to passing some of the most progressive pro-RJ laws in key states last year, including the California Omnibus Act, Colorado's historic birth equity bill package, and a repeal of a parental notification of abortion law in Illinois that took almost a decade of grassroots organizing by our grantee partner, Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health, and their partners. Next slide. Our grantees were also active in harm reduction to mitigate the impact of harmful laws. For example, National Network of Abortion Funds supported rapid response efforts by abortion funds after Texas's horrific SB 8 6-week abortion ban and bounty law. RJ grantees across the country were also successful in beating back and blocking harmful laws and policies, like RJimpact in Louisiana, who organized to educate state policymakers about trans people's lives and experiences, so that when 4 anti-trans measures were introduced in Louisiana in 2021, all 4 failed. As opponents of reproductive justice gain ground in the South, the Midwest, and Southwest, our grantees are not backing down. They need support to defend and reclaim reproductive justice in every single state. Next slide. We know that there is untapped potential in the RJ movement. When we asked our grantee partners what were the greatest barriers to your work, they named that resource challenges were cited most often. In fact, 64% of organizations said that their work would be more powerful if they had the resources to adequately staff up and to retain talent. This is a call to action for individual donors and foundations. Reproductive justice organizations that are led by women of color and trans people of color operate in challenging contexts on the front lines of fights for reproductive freedom. At every level, they are coming up against a well-funded and powerful opposition that has pursued a 50-year strategy. RJ organizations have the brilliance and the intersectional solutions that we need, yet out of all of the obstacles that they face, philanthropy has the power to change the resource challenges by giving flexible, multi-year general support dollars that are rooted in trust and partnership. The RJ movement is really calling for individual donors and funders to fund us like you want us to win. Next slide. So after this briefing, we invite you to learn more about the RJ movement's impact by visiting the microsite rjimpact.org. Next slide. And at Groundswell, we truly believe in following the lead of our grantee partners and listening to the reproductive justice movement. And I'm so excited that today we will get to do just that by hearing from an entirely movement-run panel of Groundswell grantees based in the South and the Southwest, who will be sharing their strength, their power, and their calls to action for philanthropy. And now I'm pleased to present today's moderator, Sarita Burrell at the Afia Center in Dallas, Texas.
Thank you, Na. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Sarita Burrell. My pronouns are she, her, and it is a pleasure to be sharing space with all of you today. As a community advocate dedicated to dismantling systems of oppression, I passionately work to elevate the voices and experiences of Black women. My journey into this work began nearly 10 years ago when I began volunteering for the Afia Center. It was an opportunity for me to work in the nonprofit sector and give back to the community. I had no idea that a chance meeting would change my life. I was completely unaware of the havoc that HIV was having on Black women, and the concept of reproductive justice was new to me. The more I dedicated my time to the Afia Center, the more my soul began to thirst to understand the ways in which the organization was working to change the lives of Black women and girls in Texas. Upon receiving our first pot of rural funding, I was brought on as a consultant. I joined the project management team to organize the first ever Texas Black Women Rise Up Reproductive Justice Summit in 2018. My work continued with the AFIA Center as an organizational strategist, where I led the efforts for our 2018 summit. And then I rejoined the AFIA Center in 2020 at the height of the pandemic as the communications manager, while also holding down a 9-to-5 corporate gig. During this time, the company that I was working for had sent out an internal statement following the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and their failure to meet the moment and speak directly to their Black employees was the moment I realized that this corporate life was no longer serving me and I needed to find a way out. Now, the AFIA Center was ready to welcome me with open arms, but I was faced with the dilemma of leaving all of the corporate perks and walking into my purpose. See, as a health advocacy organization that unapologetically centers Black women and fights for birth equity, full bodily autonomy inclusive of abortion, HIV support and programming, and just the overall well-being of our communities, the best we are able to provide is a health stipend to our staff and the promise that one day we will have the funding to offer a comprehensive and competitive benefits package. Needless to say, I took the leap. I left corporate and all of its perks, and now I serve as the director of programs for the AFIA Center. As we begin to shape what the next iteration of leadership at the AFIA Center looks like, it's my personal mission to identify ways to close the funding gap for Black women-led organizations. So things like health insurance and retirement plans are the standard and not merely a luxury. Black women doing this work deserve so much more. I'm so honored to be doing this work at a pivotal time such as this. And while I'm privileged to work in a space that intentionally centers Black women and allows me to show up every day as my authentic self, it's not lost on me that the fight for reproductive freedom will continue to be a hard fight. So much so, last year, the Texas legislature passed Senate Bill 8, which banned abortions after 6 weeks and criminalized those of us who help folks needing abortions. The Supreme Court failed to act, leaving the unconstitutional ban on abortion in place, which opened up the floodgates for other states to follow. But our Texas governor did not stop there. He called 3 additional special sessions with the sole purpose of pushing through voter suppression and anti-trans legislation, creating a domino effect across the nation. And so as our opposition tries to bury us with attacks and crisis after crisis, as Na mentioned earlier, the reproductive justice movement, we are not backing down, nor are we staying quiet. Our seeds continue to grow, they replicate, we continue to organize, dream big, plan, and build a place where we can thrive and live as our best true selves. At the AFIA Center, we recently published our State of Black Women in Texas report, which outlines what's needed for Black women to live abundant lives, but it also provides a very clear and concise correlation between racism, historical marginalization, and systemic violence that's been perpetuated against Black women, and the efforts and the effects that these factors have on our lives and our livelihoods. That is why the need for more folks like my co-conspirators who are joining me today is greater in order for us to actualize true revolutionary change within our communities. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my co-conspirators. Would each of you please give your name, introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, the organization you're with, and tell us what drives you to organize for reproductive justice in this moment. Santra, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Sarita, for all the amazing work that you're doing. And I'm excited to be here as one of the grantees of Groundswell and be here with my fellow folks on this panel. My name is Santra Dennis. My pronouns is she, hers. I'm a descendant of freedom fighters, a daughter of Haitian immigrants, and a daughter of the revolution, I would say. I'm a native of South Florida, proud to be a Floridian. While we get a lot of noise, I still believe in the power of working class people in Florida and what we'll be able to do. I am honored to serve as the executive director of the Miami Worker Center in this very moment. Similar to what Sheena is bringing up, this is a moment. What a time to serve. What a time to lead. And I believe all of my life experience, the revolutions, being a child of a revolution, being a child of freedom fighters really positions all of us to step into this leadership and lead with our communities at this moment. The Miami Worker Center organizes working class tenants, domestic workers, women and families for the rights, resources, and respect we deserve. I joined the Miami Worker Center in April 2020. If you all recall, things were shutting down. Many of our members were trying to navigate what shutting down for a pandemic meant for them. They had children in schools who were shutting down without a real equitable plan for what would happen to them. We know that there were many of our workers are being laid off or not being paid, not receiving hazardous pay or even PPE while they entered into people's homes, taking care of the sick and the elderly. We also know that single mothers, mothers with small children, were experiencing evictions at very high rates, and that is true across the entire country. And lastly, I would say that we organized with immigrant folks and they were locked out of government benefits. It was clear to us at the Miami Worker Center that we would need to step up. We would need to ensure that our communities survive. And our membership are Black and brown women who were going to be experiencing the fallout of the pandemic, but also we know that they will be the ones to step up as they always do to ensure that folks are not by themselves, to ensure that people have circles to grieve together, to take care of one another through mutual aid, to ensure that we organize for an eviction moratorium and to ensure that our families, immigrant communities have everything that they need and there weren't any further restrictions. And one of the reasons why the question talks about what drives you, fundamentally what drives me is my belief in the power of working class, ordinary people and their leadership and what is possible when they step up, when they're given the space, when they're given the resources to transform our communities. And I'm excited to be on this panel. And I'll pass back to you, Sarita. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for that introduction. Next is Darnisha.
Hi everyone, I'm Darnisha Duncan Boyd from Birmingham, Alabama. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the founder of Take Resource Center. Take stands for Transgenders, Advocates, Knowledgeable, Empowering. We provide supportive services to Black and brown, trans men and women here throughout the state of Alabama. And we do some expansive work out in Pennsylvania with our civic engagement program. What drives me to do this work is simple. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm trans, I'm unapologetic. Like all the different identities that makes me up as a whole person, it's what drives me to do the work. So it's not one barrier that creates this opportunity for me to do the work. So you know that we're tackling food insecurities, housing crisis, employment, discrimination, like the list goes on. And when we think about the disparities that people face when it comes to health, it's like, these are our bodies, we have control of our bodies, so why should we let someone else govern us? So that's the reason why I'm connected to this work.
Thank you, Darnisha. And lastly, we'll have Christina.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for inviting me into this space. I feel so honored to be sharing a virtual stage with all of you right now. I'm Christina Solis, pronouns are she, her, and I'm the political director with the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights, but you can call us COLOR. COLOR works to enable all Latinx folks and their families to lead safe, healthy, self-determined lives. We began when a group of grassroots Latinas came together to address the increasing rates of HIV and AIDS and other issues that impact our communities around healthcare, education, and immigration. In order to begin solving these issues and get to the root of them, these Latinas formed our organization, the first Latina-led and Latina-serving reproductive justice organization in Colorado, and that was back in 1998. As the times have changed, the political climate has changed. Colora has evolved and kept up with the political climate in order to better serve our communities. We have programs geared toward leadership development, cafecitos in our communities, educating on important topics, and organizers on the ground talking to our communities about issues that impact them on a daily basis. All of this is in work to get our communities involved in the solutions about these issues that are really impacting our lives. We take folks, we meet them at their house and take them to the People's House in Denver to really testify and advocate for themselves and lead. We know the importance of being included in decisions that impact our lives, and that's why we're working to also co-create a leadership development program for those in our community who want to run for office, because who better to represent us than ourselves, right? And as for like what motivates me to keep working in this work, because we all know, us probably more than anyone else, right, that organizing around reproductive justice in this climate is so exhausting and so difficult. And there are times when I want to just quit and go open a little bakery and just live my own little private life. But the conversations that we have in communities and the conversations that I have with my colleagues and people who look like me and who do this every single day and we live these issues, that's what keeps me going. That hope that we have, the solutions that we have, I know we can win and we can do this. And that's really energizing, especially whenever everything is becoming so overwhelming. So thank you again for letting me be here with y'all.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to my other co-conspirators, and for sharing with all of us what drives you to do this work. As the election season approaches, and with the backdrop of the ongoing attempts to criminalize our mere existence, each of your organizations are part of Groundswell's integrated voter engagement capacity building program. Mainstream movements tend to box us in as Black voters or Indigenous voters or Latinx voters or Asian American and Pacific Islander voters, not acknowledging the fact that we're not a monolith. The work that is being done by each of you continues to not only highlight the complexities of our communities, but the importance of bringing it all back to organizing basics, meeting people where they are, getting to know your base. Now mentioned it earlier, and I just want to echo Audre Lorde's quote again, because it really does embody the work that we all do. There is no single issue. There's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. For Miami Workers Center, reproductive justice is housing justice, is workers justice. Sandra, can you break it down for us and how the Miami Workers Center work for reproductive justice is interconnected to voting rights?
Absolutely. We like to say reproductive justice is immigrant justice, is worker justice, is all the justices, right? Because we know and believe in intersectionality and understanding that we are organizing with whole people who are experiencing all the things. We like to also say that we deserve all the things. And so we're fighting for all the things. Ultimately, we're fighting for our liberation. And so clearly, in terms of what we know is that fundamentally, when we're talking about reproductive justice, we're talking about autonomy and access, our abilities to live autonomous lives and have access to the resources that we need. And for us, that means safe, affordable housing, access to quality healthcare, access to good jobs that pay benefits so that we can retire at some point when we like to. Public land free from wasteful luxury spending and climate gentrification, access to clean air, water, food, fresh food and green spaces for our families are all the issues that come up. And an individual, one person in our membership can bring up all the issues. Unfortunately, we'll have a member who will be experiencing eviction, also experiencing wage theft, and also experiencing some intimate partner violence. And so we know that we can't just focus on one issue. We got to focus on all the issues that our communities are experiencing. In terms of voting and how this is connected to voting rights, For us, we understand in Florida, the Florida legislature is doing everything in its power to undermine our autonomy and limit our say around all the issues that are important to us. And they do this by ensuring that we don't have access to voting. Senate Bill 90 in the state of Florida is especially an attack on working class people, and especially an attack on Latinx and Black communities in South Florida. So what the bill does is that it restricts ballot boxes, which I'll say a little bit more about that, reduces ballot boxes, limits the ability for folks to do line warming, which allows for people to provide food and beverages while folks are waiting in line. If you all have seen all throughout the country, Florida lines can tend to be 2 to 3 hours. It is hot. All the people experience all the elements. If it's not hot, it's often raining. And also there's an increase for our ability to request absentee ballots. It used to be you have to request them on a 4-year cycle. Now you have to do it every 2 years. All of these are increased barriers so that we won't have an ability to have a say-so, have autonomy in what we want the state legislature to prioritize. These restrictions exacerbate an already unjust system, a system that really locks some of us out. And so our fight for housing justice, labor justice, health justice, all the justices, because again, we're fighting for liberation, has to include voter rights. And so we have our eyes on the Florida legislature. We are in solidarity with our sisters across the entire country, making sure that we have a fight back in us, and we won't, we tell folks we won't go. We are here to stay in Florida, and we want to make sure that the issues that matter to our people are heard, and they have an opportunity to make sure that their voices are heard. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra, for highlighting those points and making those very important connections for us. As we are seeing the ongoing attacks against abortion access, interconnected is the renewed institutional, cultural, and physical attacks against trans communities, especially trans folks of color and our trans youth. Both abortion and trans rights are being used as wedge issues to galvanize our opposition to vote against the interests of Black and Brown communities. In Alabama actually just passed one of the worst anti-trans bans on trans youth receiving life-saving gender-affirming care. Darnisha, how are you all fighting back and harnessing the power of trans communities?
When you think about the SB Bill 184, that's a bill that I thought that would never pass, but of course, living in a red state, I had hope, but I knew that it was going to possibly happen here in Alabama. And so once it was passed, we had to think of ways to be creative. And I've been thinking of these ways for the past few years due to the fact that I know living in America, being Black, being trans, the Deep South, Angelical Christian State, Bible Belt, like the list goes on, Western Alabama, what's happening. So I had to make sure that as I got creative with my programming, that I was able to tackle some of these issues, because I knew that we needed to have a voice when it comes to voting, and most of all being civic engaged. And so I expanded TAKE's programming to open up our civic engagement program over the past year, where we've been doing work not only in Alabama, but also in Pennsylvania, where they're experiencing some hate bills there as well around our trans youth. Just building the base, simply gearing trans folks up, providing them with leadership development, most of all doing the Knowing Your Rights training. Also, those that need their voters' rights restored, because just because you're a felon, that doesn't mean that you can't vote. And so a lot of our people thinks like, oh, I committed a crime where I maybe, bust a few checks to survive, or I stole some money, or whatever that looked like in survival, that I basically can't vote anymore. And they just don't know their rights. So getting those people restored, And also just, like I said, building the base, just letting people know, like, you have the right to exist. Your voice matters. Are you registered to vote? Checking people's status, see if they're active. We know a lot of times around the IDs, the identification. If the identification don't match, then it's, you know, it's often a problem. And I even much experienced that firsthand before, years ago, when I didn't have my gender marker changed or whatever. And once my gender marker wasn't changed, this lady, she was basically telling me like it was like two different people. And she was saying something, I think I had added my last name once I got married wasn't updated on my ID. And she told me that I couldn't vote. And I basically had to stand up to her and advocate and say, no, that's not true. I have documentation that shows that this is my married name now, but this is who I am. And I had to prove to her basically, but if just think of it was a trans person that was there up under that pressure and she was basically being questioned and they will walk away without voting. So these are the things that we're doing through our civic engagement work that we're doing up under the IV program through Groundswell or whatever. And it's just really exciting work.
Thank you, Dernish, for the work that you're doing at TAKE to ensure that trans communities are prioritized, seen, heard, and valued. Trusting and centering BIPOC-led groups creates a space in the magic to win progressive changes. This year, Colored helped to win the Reproductive Health Equity Act, making Colorado a safe haven for full spectrum reproductive care. But now you're fighting an anti-abortion ballot measure from the opposition, which came in response to your contraceptive and birth justice win last year. Christina, for Color, can you share with us the importance of having a robust state-level infrastructure that not only centers people of color and is strong enough to win and defend your wins?
Yes, it's Christina, she, her again. We are so incredibly proud of our work with REA, or the Reproductive Health Equity Act. We knew the Supreme Court was going to strike down Roe v. Wade. We know that Roe has never been enough for our communities. It has never given us access like it has for white folks. So we knew that we needed to take some steps in order to protect access to abortion here in Colorado. So we were able to come together with our partners to bring forth REA this legislative session and build a coalition plan, a long-term coalition plan to remove additional barriers to abortion access. That includes in 2024, looking at a proactive ballot measure that would remove our public funding ban here in the state. And just taking these steps to remove barriers and actually create accessible access to abortion care for our communities. That plan also includes being prepared for anti-abortion proponents who are trying yet again to bring another abortion ban to the ballot, despite being defeated by us 4 times at the ballot in the past 12 years. Coloradan voters, Latinas here in Colorado, do not want abortion bans, and we have said that over and over again. So we're watching that measure closely, and we should know in early August whether it makes it to the ballot or not. But we're ready to engage our communities at a moment's notice to turn out again and vote no, and to have conversations with their people about these bans. All of that to say, these wins would not have been possible without partners and coalitions who are doing the work alongside of us in their respective communities each and every day. So to your question, Sarita, by having that state level infrastructure in states that really and truly center BIPOC-led and serving organizations means that those communities of color who are often and have historically been left out of those decision-making spaces have a voice and are truly represented. It's how we can take back control from those who want to control us and get to solutions that are actually going to benefit our communities. So I feel like I'm going to just brag about Color and the work that we've done for the past couple of years. So bear with me for a second. We're organizing in the Latino and Latina community, and we're having real conversations every day with our people so that we can take that knowledge and those conversations to the spaces that we occupy and bring forth policies that's going to benefit everyone. Because of our year-round community engagement, and because we are working to strategically implement our policy work, with our organizing work, with our communications work, with our program work, COLOR has been instrumental in passing programs, not just like RHEA, but like SB9 last year, the Reproductive Healthcare Program. This is a program that provides 12 months of contraceptive coverage to those on Medicaid, including our undocumented communities. And now we're working with our state Medicaid office alongside of our communities as well to really educate about the start of this program and get folks aware that it's going to begin on July 1 and they can start applying right then. We were also able to partner with Elephant Circle last year, like Na mentioned, on the birth equity bill package. This was the most comprehensive birth equity package in the nation. And it was 3 bills with a purpose to protect human rights, address discrimination, mistreatment, harm, poor outcomes and inequities in outcomes during the perinatal period. This package of bills was made possible because of the partnerships between COLOR and Elephant Circle, another incredible BIPOC-led organization that brings an intersectional, feminist, and reproductive justice-centered approach to birth justice. We have always had a great relationship with Elephant Circle, and it was an honor to work alongside of them to bring this important legislation here to Colorado and build that coalition that has communities of color leading at the forefront. The partnerships that we form and the alliance building that we do is so important. Without our co-conspirators in this work, it would be impossible to continue. So those spaces that can be created where we, BIPOC-led and serving organizations, are at the center so that we can collaborate, brainstorm, problem solve, and have honest conversations mean everything. And that's how we get to these incredible wins whenever we're centering organizations like all of ours here today.
Thank you, Christina, and congratulations on moving the Reproductive Health Equity Act in Colorado. And we're all rooting for COLOR to defeating the anti-abortion ballot measure in August. Part of our work as reproductive justice organizers and visionaries is to reflect and learn on our past wins and lessons learned. As you reflect on 2021, a full year and a half of the pandemic, the uprisings, the insurrection, the nonstop attacks on our existence, and the opposition's attempt to criminalize us. As we are in the 3rd year of the pandemic, what is one lesson learned that you want funders and donors to take away with them today? And if you all can keep your remarks to 1 minute, that would be really helpful as we're nearing our time. Sandra, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarita. Believe in the power of the people. In a state like Florida, where so many things seems as if it may be impossible, we are seeing communities at the local level understand that that's where we can build power in the moment as we figure out what's going on in the state. So fund local base building organizations who are building with working class people that are taking on leadership to transform their communities. Ask questions about the membership, get really clear about the funding that that folks are receiving and who it's going to and where it's getting to. That is what I would say as a small organization in Miami-Dade County doing phenomenal work in our small corner of the world. I believe we're fabulous. Get to know others just like us and all throughout the country who's doing amazing work. And I'll pause there.
Thank you, Sandra, for those reflections. Darnisha?
I guess I can keep it 1 minute, but I'll try my best. I'll first start by saying, trust Black women. We're nurturers. We know what we're doing. We know how to do the work. We know our people. We know how to show up and take care. The next thing I will have to offer up is just simply make direct investments, multi-year grants, general operating, because I'm telling you, during this COVID pandemic with the general operating funds, I have been able to move some things around, create magic. Just trust and believe, I remember growing up, just example, how my mother would cook just 1 pot of beans and they were stretched with some cornbread. And we ate off that all week. So believe whatever you give us, we're gonna make it stretch.
Thank you, Darnisha. And Christina?
Oh my goodness. 5,000% to everything that y'all have lifted up so far. I think my takeaway that I want funders to have is that this consistent funding is so important. We can't keep organizing year round. We can't keep doing this work if we're uncertain about when funding is going to come in, or if we only get that significant funding during election years or whenever a crisis pops up. So our communities deserve to be invested in year round continuously. We're not GOTV votes. We're not just to be relied on to turn out. We need to be in community. We need to be having conversations, and we need to be at the forefront.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for your reflections and offering those lessons that you want our funders and donors to take away with them today. And as we close, and just as each of my co-conspirators make a choice every single day to live free and fully thrive, and to make sure that Black and Brown folks can do the same if they choose to, each of the funders and donors who have joined us today, the question before you is, will you commit yourselves to the idea that all Black and Brown folks deserve the right to live and thrive? Do you make the choice to fight with us, or fight for us, protect us, and value us unapologetically with courageous love that uplifts us? Do you commit to fund RJ grassroots organizations? And with that, I'd like to thank my co-conspirators for joining me today, and thank all of you, all the funders and donors who took time out of their day to attend this briefing. And I'll turn it back over to Na.
Thank you, Sarita, and thank you to our powerful panel, giving you a virtual round of applause. So folks, you heard it for yourselves today, and there is nothing left to say but to ask, will we as donors and funders be as unapologetic and as courageous as RJ movement leaders who are literally in this moment putting their bodies and safety on the line to defend reproductive justice? I can't tell you how many heartbreaking conversations I have had to have with RJ movement leaders this year who are preparing to be personally targeted for the work that they love in the years ahead. The question for us is, will we flank these leaders as they face increased criminalization, digital threats, and violence from anti-abortion, anti-trans, and white supremacist forces? Will we have their backs? We at Groundswell invite you to join us by saying an enthusiastic yes. Then we invite you to open your wallets. There is an RJ organization located in the state that you are calling in from. You can support them today. Fund the brilliant organizations that you heard from in today's panel. Donate to the groups in your home state, as well as those in the regions who are facing the greatest levels of backlash. And partner with Groundswell to direct dollars and capacity building resources to hundreds of frontline defenders for reproductive justice who are under attack in the South, the Midwest, the Southwest, and across the country. We are ready. Will you join us? So there are 3 things you can do today to join us. The first is you can learn about the RJ movement by visiting RJimpact.org. The second is you can sign the pledge from a coalition of funders and other stakeholders, including Groundswell, who have released an open letter to philanthropy to protect abortion access and reproductive justice, and the link is on the screen. And third, you can connect with Groundswell. We encourage you to send us your questions and your enthusiastic pledges to support the RJ movement by filling out the email that just landed in your inbox. Most importantly, we invite you to take action. We need all of us if we're gonna win. I wanna thank you for attending today's RJimpact briefing. May it light a fire within you to be courageous in the face of fear and uncertainty, and to stand in solidarity with the fierce RJ leaders that we need right now.